Hi everyone, my name is Kayla and welcome back to Kay's Hidden Shelf where we talk about books. Today I have a spoiler-free review for you, and that is Lightfall by Ed Crocker. Originally I received this paperback from the author in exchange for an honest review. However, I did go out and buy the audiobook myself in order to immersion read it and to be able to comment on it within the review as well. Let's cover a couple of key points. This is a supernatural political intrigue fantasy. You heard me. This has vampires, werewolves, sorcerers, immortal beings mixed with political intrigue that is dense and twisty. In short, there are no mortals in sight within this book, and it is the first book and I believe to be a trilogy. With that being the case, it's dense. This is 365 pages in terms of the copy that I have, and it is deceptive. It doesn't seem like much, it's not 800 or 1,000 pages, but the word count is much higher than the page count leads on. There is so much depth and density to this world, and the writing style is descriptive, so there is so much that is explored. And we're dealing with immortals, vampires, werewolves, and these long-lived sorcerers that there are the thousands of years of history to cover within this world, which makes it all the more fascinating as we develop and get into the plot and conspiracies that follow. There's a lot to this book, and I think for that reason, it might be a bit deceptive for readers. If you're picking this up thinking, oh, this is going to be a fast-paced adventure or a quick read, no, this is going to take some time, it's going to take some attention, and it's going to be a little bit more in-depth than you might originally get on first impressions. So if you adore political intrigue, that slow burn, the developments, the twists and turns that come along with that political intrigue and first lords and a divided society of peasants versus reigning family members or royalty, yeah, I definitely think you will enjoy this. Essentially, this story starts at a murder. The First Lord Azuri's son, his youngest son, is murdered, and that is where the chapter begins. It's such an interesting place to start because you're thrown right into the midst of a murder mystery. How did this young lord die? And now the descending chaos that follows after it. From that point, we follow multiple POVs throughout this entire story. The further you read, the more characters you get to meet, and for that reason, I really adored it. You only really get the characters you need to see in order to build this story, and for that reason, I think it works really well. For example, there is a side character to one of the main POVs that we really only get his perspective once, and it's only necessary in that moment to show part of his heist. Apart from that, he is simply a side character to one of the main POVs, which is Sage, and it's just so much. There's so much detail, there's so many things to follow, and it all plays out seamlessly one after another. That being said, you're not simply going to be getting an individual chapter per POV. POVs are going to swap mid-chapters, but they are contained with headers for each one, so you know who you are changing into the perspective of within each chapter. I hope that description made sense. So right from the beginning, you're thrown into a murder mystery that spirals into a conspiracy, and just shenanigans continue to ensue. The political intrigue part is so fascinating because you have hundreds of thousands of years worth of lore that you can explore within this world. It's a lot. And for that reason, there are tensions that are not fully explored yet because this is book one, but we primarily get a look at the main kingdom of the vampires, but there are werewolves, there are different sectors and groups of sorcerers, so there are varying political tensions between each of these species, if you will, and then add that on top of the conspiracies going on and the threat of these Greys who have somehow found the ability to murder these immortals and are essentially keeping them pinned in their kingdoms. There's so much to unpack within it all. I will say the first part of the book, I'd say the first quarter of the book, can be a bit dense and a lot to get into. There are points where I wasn't entirely sure what was going to happen, where all of this setup was going to lead, and at a certain point it all just clicked. And I had a hard time putting it down. I started paying way more attention because I started to realize that there was more detail to this and more breadcrumbs and foreshadowing than I first realized when in that first quarter. Because the first quarter is kind of giving you setup, it's giving you introductions to characters and history. It's teaching you about the whole conflict that happened a century ago where these Greys had threatened the lives of vampires, werewolves, and these immortals alike and sent them running for the hills. They destroyed the paradise that they had created and sent them into hiding, essentially. So there's a lot to unpack in that first little bit. I do think this book will be a bit divisive. Some people will love it. Some people might not enjoy it. I thoroughly enjoyed the payoffs that we got, how characters were developing. We have a main character, for example, who is just a bookworm, but she's not supposed to be reading. She's a maid. She has essentially no right. She's a peasant. She has no right to the libraries, for example. And so she is trying to find her freedom through researching and reading in the libraries. And it's just fascinating how that all develops. We have another main character who is a bit like Sherlock Holmes in a way, and I really appreciated the direction of his character arc. You have a werewolf assassin, for example, a first lord who is trying his best to do the best he can for his people, and time again, he is having to clean up messes, even from his oldest son, for example. And I just read the book if you want to know what happens there. But his oldest son is basically a psycho. And yeah, imagine trying to run a city and your oldest son just takes power way too far and you're trying to keep the peace. And oh, there's a lot that happens there too. So there's so much to this. It's dense. If you love political intrigue, if you love those big, hefty books, those 800-page chunkers, but you want it in a shorter page count, definitely check this out as well. If you're like me, where you enjoy the aspects of supernatural fantasy, but you don't necessarily enjoy it in smut, for example, definitely check this out too. I don't know of many other fantasy books that incorporate supernatural elements and creatures but are not smut related. So if you have those recommendations, please pop them in the comments below. I would love to read more in that genre. And finally, the last aspect of this that I think works really well is the author. While there is a lot of description and detail and history to uncover within the world, he does not hold your hand. The author does not hold your hand throughout the story. You are left to your own devices to pay attention and try and put the puzzle pieces together as you read. And for that reason, I really appreciate the effort that takes because there is so much setup that is involved. Not everything is handed to you, not everything is explained to you, and when the reveals come, they feel much more worth the wait, if that makes sense. Overall, this is different. Like I said too, this will probably be a divisive book. Some people will love it, some people may not. And again, that first quarter is a lot of information to parse through as you're meeting characters, but at a certain point, it just clicked for me. And from there, I thoroughly enjoyed the reveals, the pacing of it, its complexity, all of it, and then the world on top of it all was fascinating. So I'm really curious to see where the series goes, especially with everything that was set up and revealed at the end of this one, leading into book 2. So I am really curious to see what happens next. If this sounds up your alley, by all means, go check it out. The audiobook is fantastic. The narrator, Shakira, I think is her first name. I can't remember the last name. I'll pop it on the screen there, but she did a fantastic job at doing multiple voices. A performance for this was fantastic. It really brought life to the story and the characters, but I also appreciate the performance that she gave for each of the characters too, because they are completely different in their personalities, and I think she captured it really, really well. So definitely go check out the audiobook if you are in for an immersion read or audio listen only. Really, when it comes down to it, just try it. That's the best way to find out if a book is for you. If it sounds interesting, if it piques your curiosity, by all means, I'd love to know how it goes if you decide to pick this up. So leave your comments down below. Does this sound interesting to you? And if you have those other book recommendations, please leave them in the comments for me to check out as well. As always, thank you so much for watching and take care of yourselves.